The plane terminal was loud and bright and full of moving people. Travelers rolled bags across the shiny floor and looked at screens and signs. A small 10-year-old girl named Mila stood near the boarding line with a cloth bag held close to her chest. She wore a faded blue sweater and old shoes that looked like they once belonged to someone bigger. Her hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, and her eyes kept scanning the crowd like she was searching for something safe. She had never flown before, and everything around her felt too big and too fast. She tried to copy the calm faces of adults, but her fingers kept squeezing the strap of her bag. When the gate agent called the next group, Mila stepped forward quietly. Her ticket was folded and unfolded so many times that the corners were soft. She handed it over with both hands and nodded when the agent pointed her toward the jet bridge. The tunnel leading to the plane felt like a long hallway that swallowed her up. She walked slowly and listened to the hum of machines and distant voices. Each step made her stomach flutter like a small bird trapped inside. She reminded herself that she was doing something important. She was going to her aunt because there was no one else left to take care of her. Inside the plane, the air smelled like clean fabric and recycled cold air. People moved into rows and lifted bags overhead and spoke with tired impatience. Mila found her seat and sat down quickly as if sitting could hide her. The seat belt felt heavy in her small hands, so she clicked it in place right away. She looked out the window at the ground far below and felt a rush of fear and wonder. Around her, adults talked about business and vacations and schedules. No one looked at her for more than a second. The man sitting beside her arrived a moment later and sat down without greeting anyone. His suit was dark and perfectly pressed, and his shoes looked expensive and new. A watch on his wrist caught the cabin lights like a small mirror. His hair was neat, and his face looked calm but distant. He placed his phone and a thin folder on the tray table and sighed as if the entire world was resting on his shoulders. Mila noticed people in the aisle glancing toward him and whispering under their breath. She did not know his name yet, but she could feel he was someone important. The man was Mr. Ron, and many people on the plane recognized him. He was a billionaire with companies in many cities, and his face appeared in news stories and online videos. He was used to being watched and praised and judged. Still, he felt lonely most of the time. He had spent years running from one meeting to another and building success that never seemed to bring peace. On this flight, he wanted quiet and nothing else. He leaned back and closed his eyes as if to shut out the whole cabin. The plane began to move, and the safety announcement played in a steady voice. Mila listened carefully, even though she barely understood the words. She watched the flight attendant demonstrate the seatbelt and the oxygen mask and the emergency exits. Her heart beat faster when the engines grew louder. When the plane lifted off the ground, she gripped her armrest so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The houses and roads became tiny shapes below, and the sky swallowed the world. Mila swallowed hard and tried to breathe slowly like she had practiced when she felt scared. A few minutes after takeoff, the cabin settled into a softer rhythm. People opened drinks and snacks and lowered their seats. Some passengers began watching movies while others slept. Mila kept staring out the window at the clouds that looked like mountains made of cotton. She felt small but also strangely proud. She was doing this alone, and she was not crying. She glanced at Mr. Ron beside her, and saw his eyes were still closed. His face looked tired, and there was a tight line around his mouth. She noticed his hands were not resting calmly. They were trembling slightly near his lap, as if his body was fighting something he did not want to show. Mila kept watching in quiet concern. She had seen fear before. She had seen sickness before too. Her mother had once sat at a bus stop breathing hard, and people walked by as if she was invisible. Mila had been younger then, but she remembered it clearly. She remembered the way her mother tried to smile while struggling. That memory stayed in Mila like a warning. She told herself she would never pretend not to notice when someone needed help. Mr. Ron suddenly opened his eyes and blinked as if he could not focus. He shifted in his seat and took a deep breath that sounded wrong. His hand moved to his chest and pressed there as if he was trying to calm his heartbeat. He looked toward the aisle, but his eyes were unfocused and glassy. He tried to straighten his posture and hide the problem, but his breathing grew heavier. His face lost color, and a thin shine of sweat appeared on his forehead. Mila felt a cold wave run through her stomach. At first the passengers around them did not notice. Some were laughing softly at a screen. Others were sleeping with headphones on. The flight attendants were busy a few rows away. Mr. Ron's breathing became rougher and his shoulders rose and fell too quickly. He tried to take a sip of water, but his hand shook and the bottle rattled. Mila leaned slightly toward him and saw his lips were pale. Her fear turned into action. Mila unbuckled her seat belt and stood up on her seat to be seen. Her voice was small but clear as she called for help. She did not shout wildly. She spoke with urgency and focus like a person who knew every second mattered. A nearby passenger looked up annoyed at first and then saw Mr. Ron's face and froze. A flight attendant turned quickly and rushed down the aisle. The flight attendant knelt beside Mr. Ron and asked him questions in a calm voice. Mr. Ron tried to answer, but his breath cut his words into pieces. The attendant pressed a call button and asked if any medical professional was on board. A man in another row raised his hand and moved forward. He said he was a doctor and he asked for space. The aisle cleared as people stood back and watched with tense silence. The doctor checked Mr. Ron and spoke to him steadily while the attendant brought a medical kit. Mila stepped down and sat back in her seat, but she kept watching. Her hands were shaking now, but she forced herself to stay quiet so the adults could work. The doctor guided Mr. Ron to breathe slowly. The attendant brought water and the doctor checked his pulse. The plane felt like it had stopped being a normal flight. Even the engine sound felt louder because the cabin had fallen so still. Some passengers looked worried and others looked guilty for not noticing sooner. After several minutes, Mr. Ron's breathing began to steady. Color returned to his face little by little. The doctor stayed close and kept speaking in a low voice. The flight attendant asked if Mr. Ron wanted the captain notified and if he needed anything else. Mr. Ron nodded weakly and managed a quiet thank you. His eyes drifted around the cabin and then landed on Mila. He looked confused at first and then he seemed to understand what had happened. Mr. Ron turned toward Mila slowly. His voice was softer than people expected from a powerful man. He asked her if she was the one who called for help. Mila nodded and looked down for a moment. She did not want attention. She only wanted him to be okay. Mr. Ron asked how she knew something was wrong when everyone else was busy. Mila answered with simple honesty. She said she saw his hands trembling and she saw his face change. She said she could not stay quiet because she had seen what happens when people ignore someone in pain. Mr. Ron's eyes narrowed with interest as if her words touched a hidden place inside him. He asked what she meant. Mila hesitated and then spoke gently. She said her mother once needed help in public and strangers looked away. Mila said she remembered that feeling and she did not want anyone else to feel it. Mr. Ron swallowed hard and stared forward as if he was trying to steady more than his breathing. The passengers near them listened without meaning to. Even the doctor looked at Mila with respect. The flight attendant thanked Mila and told her she did the right thing. Mila nodded, but her cheeks warmed. She sat still and folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Ron stayed turned slightly toward her as if he could not stop looking at her. He asked her name and she told him. He asked if she was traveling with family. Mila shook her head and said she was traveling alone to stay with her aunt. She said her parents were not here anymore and her aunt was the only family she had left. She said it quietly without trying to make anyone feel sorry. It was simply her life. Mr. Ron listened and something shifted in his expression. He had met thousands of people who wanted his attention. Most wanted money or connections or a photo. This child wanted nothing from him, yet she had protected him without hesitation. He offered her a snack from his bag and she accepted one small pack after asking if it was okay. She did not grab more. She did not act greedy. That small moment made Mr. Ron feel even more stunned. As the plane continued through the clouds, the cabin slowly returned to normal. Passengers went back to their screens, but the mood had changed. People kept glancing at Mila with new eyes. Mr. Ron kept thinking about the way she stood up without fear. He realized he wanted to repay her. He wanted to do something meaningful for a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. A long quiet stretch passed, and then Mila looked up at Mr. Ron again. Her eyes were serious and calm, like she had been holding something inside and was finally ready to speak. She took a breath and asked him a question in a steady voice. It was not about money and it was not about gifts. It was a question that made Mr. Ron freeze and made the passengers nearby turn their heads. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a life that had been hard. Mila looked at Mr. Ron with calm eyes and asked her question in a soft, steady voice. She asked if rich people ever felt scared of losing everything like poor people do. The words were simple, but they hit the air like a sudden silence. Mr. Ron did not answer right away. He felt as if the cabin had disappeared, and only her question remained. Passengers nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Even the flight attendant paused a few steps away. Mr. Ron leaned back slowly and looked at the ceiling of the plane. He had been asked many questions in his life. Most were about money or power or success. No one had ever asked him something so honest and so quiet. He finally looked back at Mila and told her that rich people feel fear too, but in different ways. He said they fear emptiness and loneliness and losing meaning. Mila listened carefully, as if his answer mattered deeply. Mila nodded and said she understood fear of emptiness. She said her house felt empty after her parents were gone, even though it was the same size. She said nights felt longer and sounds felt louder. Mr. Ron felt his chest tighten again, but this time it was memory, not pain. He remembered large rooms and quiet evenings and meals eaten alone. He realized how close their feelings were despite their very different lives. Mr. Ron asked Mila how she stayed brave. Mila shrugged slightly and said she was not always brave. She said she just remembered what her mother told her. Her mother said kindness was something no one could take away from you. Mr. Ron smiled faintly for the first time on the flight. He said that was a powerful thing to remember. Mila smiled back, but it was small and careful. The doctor checked on Mr. Ron again and confirmed he was stable. The flight attendant thanked everyone and returned to her duties. The plane returned fully to normal, but the space between Mila and Mr. Ron felt different. They were no longer strangers sitting side by side. They were two people sharing something real. Mr. Ron asked Mila about her life. She told him about her small town and the narrow street where she lived. She told him about her school where she liked reading more than numbers. She said she helped her neighbor carry water sometimes. She spoke in short, clear sentences without drama. Mr. Ron listened without interrupting. He felt like every word mattered more than the speeches he heard in boardrooms. Mila asked Mr. Ron what he did all day. He said he ran companies and made decisions that affected many people. Mila asked if that made him happy. Mr. Ron hesitated and then answered honestly. He said sometimes it did, but often it did not. Mila said her mother used to say that happiness grows when shared. Mr. Ron felt something warm and painful at the same time. He wondered how a child who had lost so much could still speak about sharing happiness. As the plane flew higher, the light outside shifted and the cabin grew softer. Mr. Ron offered Mila a blanket and she accepted after thanking him twice. She wrapped it around herself and looked out the window again. Mr. Ron watched her quietly. He noticed how she never wasted anything. He noticed how she listened more than she spoke. He noticed how she carried herself with a quiet strength that money could not buy. Mr. Ron began thinking about his own childhood. He remembered growing up in a small home with simple meals. He remembered his mother working long hours and still finding time to ask about his day. He realized he had been closer to Mila once than he was now. That thought stayed with him like a gentle warning. Mila suddenly asked another question. She asked if he believed people were born equal. Mr. Ron looked surprised but answered carefully. He said people were born with different chances but the same value. Mila nodded slowly. She said she hoped that was true. She said sometimes people looked at her clothes and decided who she was before she spoke. Mr. Ron felt a sharp sting of shame. He remembered how he had not noticed her at first either. Mr. Ron told Mila that she mattered and that her actions on the plane proved it. He said she had courage and awareness many adults lacked. Mila looked down and said she just did what felt right. She said she did not want a reward. She just wanted people to help each other more. Mr. Ron felt a deep respect grow inside him. A man across the aisle leaned forward and quietly told Mila she was brave. A woman nearby smiled at her with wet eyes. Mila nodded politely but stayed close to her seat. She did not seek attention. Mr. Ron realized that was part of what made her special. As the flight moved closer to its destination, the captain announced they would be landing soon. People began preparing and gathering their things. Mr. Ron felt a sense of urgency rise inside him. He knew this moment would end soon. He did not want Mila to disappear back into a hard life unchanged. He also did not want to turn her kindness into a transaction. Mr. Ron asked Mila what she wanted to be when she grew up. Mila thought for a moment and said she wanted to be someone who helped others feel safe. She said she did not know the job name yet. Mr. Ron smiled fully now. He said that was a good dream and an important one. He told her dreams like that deserved support. The plane began its descent and Mila tightened her seat belt. Mr. Ron felt stronger now and more awake than he had in years. He realized this child had given him something far greater than help during a health scare. She had reminded him who he used to be. As the wheels touched the ground and the plane slowed, the cabin filled with relief and movement. People stood and reached for bags. Mr. Ron stayed seated for a moment and looked at Mila seriously. He told her he wanted to stay in touch and help her if she allowed it. He said he would respect her wishes and her aunt's decisions. Mila looked at him quietly. She did not answer right away. She thought about her aunt and her future and the feeling she had when she spoke up on the plane. She then said she would talk to her aunt first. She said help should be honest and safe. Mr. Ron nodded with deep respect. As passengers exited the plane, Mila stood up with her cloth bag. Mr. Ron stood too. People made space for them without being asked. Mila walked forward, unaware that many eyes followed her with admiration. Mr. Ron walked behind her, feeling changed and humbled. At the gate, Mr. Ron stopped and looked at Mila one last time. He told her that her question would stay with him forever. Mila smiled softly and said questions help people grow. She then walked away toward her aunt, waiting beyond the barrier. Mr. Ron stood still as the crowd moved around him. He knew this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. Mila walked through the airport holding her cloth bag while scanning faces in the crowd. The noise felt louder on the ground than in the air, and people moved fast in every direction. She felt small again, but not as scared as before. She remembered the calm voice of Mr. Ron and the way he listened to her like she mattered. That memory gave her strength as she walked forward. At the end of the waiting area stood a woman waving gently. She was thin with tired eyes and wore a simple coat. This was her aunt named Sarah. Mila walked faster and hugged her tightly. Sarah held her close and whispered that everything would be okay. Mila nodded against her shoulder and felt safe for the first time in days. They walked outside and waited for the bus. Mila told her aunt about the plane ride in quiet pieces. She spoke about being scared at first and then about the man who became sick. She explained how she called for help and how the people listened. Sarah looked at her with wide eyes and pride. She said Mila had done something very brave. Mila shrugged and said she only did what felt right. Later that evening they reached the small apartment where Sarah lived. It was clean but crowded with old furniture and boxes. Mila placed her cloth bag beside the bed that would now be hers. She sat quietly and looked around the room. It was not much different from where she lived before, but it felt unfamiliar. Sarah made a simple meal and they ate together at a small table. Mila felt tired in her bones, but her mind stayed awake. That night Mila dreamed of the plane and the clouds. She dreamed of standing up and speaking while others stayed quiet. She woke up before the sun rose and sat on the edge of her bed. She wondered if she would ever see Mr. Ron again. She wondered if his promise meant anything beyond kind words. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the day ahead. The next morning Sarah walked Mila to a nearby school. The building was old and the walls were faded. Children gathered in small groups laughing and talking. Mila held her bag close and followed Sarah inside. The teacher welcomed her kindly and showed her a seat near the window. Mila sat down and looked at the desk in front of her. She felt nervous but ready. Days passed and Mila slowly adjusted. She helped Sarah around the apartment and walked to school each morning. Some children asked questions about her clothes and her quiet nature. Others ignored her completely. Mila kept her head down and focused on her work. She remembered her mother's words about kindness and tried to live by them. Across the city Mr. Ron returned to his world of meetings and schedules. But something was different now. He found it hard to focus on numbers and plans. Mila's question echoed in his mind during quiet moments. He began noticing things he had ignored before. He noticed the tired eyes of his staff and the silence in his large home. Mr. Ron asked his assistant to find out more about the girl from the plane. He was careful and respectful. He wanted to make sure any help would be welcome and safe. When he learned about Mila's situation and her aunt, he felt a heavy sadness and a strong resolve. He did not want to fix her life with money alone. He wanted to open doors, not control paths. A week later Sarah received a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but answered at the last moment. A calm voice introduced itself as someone calling on behalf of Mr. Ron. Sarah listened carefully while standing near the window. The voice explained that Mr. Ron wished to offer support for Mila's education and well-being if Sarah agreed. There was no pressure and no demand. Sarah asked for time to think. That evening Sarah sat with Mila and explained the call. Mila listened quietly and did not react right away. She thought about the plane and the way Mr. Ron looked at her. She thought about her school and the books she wished she could read. She told her aunt that help was good if it did not change who they were. Sarah smiled and said she agreed. When Mr. Ron received their answer he felt relief. He arranged for help in a careful way. He supported Mila's school needs and made sure Sarah had access to resources. He never visited without asking and never gave more than was needed. Mila noticed the changes, but her daily life stayed simple. She walked to school and did her chores and read whenever she could. One afternoon Mila stayed late at school to help clean the classroom. A boy tripped and hurt himself near the stairs. Other children froze, unsure of what to do. Mila ran to get a teacher and stayed with the boy until help came. The teacher praised her quick thinking. Mila felt embarrassed but calm. Helping felt natural now. News of Mila's actions slowly spread among teachers and parents. People began to see her not as the poor quiet girl, but as someone dependable. Mila did not change how she acted. She still shared what she had and listened more than she spoke. She wrote letters to her aunt's friends to thank them for kindness. She wrote one letter to Mr. Ron with simple words. She thanked him for listening and told him she was trying her best. Mr. Ron read the letter late one night. He sat in his large quiet home and held the paper carefully. The handwriting was uneven but honest. He realized that Mila was changing him just as much as he was helping her. He decided to take time away from work and visit the school with permission. He wanted to see her world with his own eyes. The visit was simple and quiet. Mr. Ron dressed plainly and stood at the back of the classroom. Mila noticed him and felt surprised but not afraid. She greeted him politely and returned to her seat. Mr. Ron watched her help another student with reading. He saw patience and care in her movements. He felt proud in a way he had never felt before. After class they spoke briefly with the teacher and with Sarah present. Mr. Ron thanked Mila for inspiring him. Mila said inspiration goes both ways. She said adults should not forget what it feels like to be small. Mr. Ron smiled and agreed. He promised to keep listening and learning. As weeks turned into months, Mila grew stronger and more confident. She still faced challenges, but she no longer felt invisible. She knew her voice mattered. Mr. Ron began changing how his companies worked. He encouraged kindness and awareness. People noticed the change and wondered what caused it. Late one evening, Mila sat by the window reading a book Mr. Ron had sent. The sky outside was dark and full of stars. She thought about the plane, and the moment she stood up, she realized that one choice had changed many lives, including her own. Far away, Mr. Ron stood by his window looking at the same sky. He felt grateful for a child who reminded him of courage and compassion. He knew their story was not finished yet. Something important was still ahead. Mila woke up early as sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of the small apartment. The city outside was already alive with sound and movement. She sat up slowly and felt calm instead of afraid. Life was still hard in many ways, but something inside her felt steady now. She washed her face and helped her aunt prepare breakfast like she did every morning. Sarah noticed the change in Mila more clearly with each passing day. Mila spoke with more confidence and walked with her head higher. She still wore simple clothes and carried the same cloth bag, but her presence felt stronger. Sarah felt grateful and careful at the same time. She wanted Mila to grow without losing her gentle heart. At school, Mila continued to help others quietly. She helped younger students read and listened when classmates felt sad. Teachers trusted her and often asked her to pass messages or help organize books. Mila never acted proud. She simply did what felt right. Other children slowly began to treat her differently. They saw her not as poor or strange, but as someone reliable. One afternoon, the school announced a small assembly. Students gathered in the hall and sat on the floor. The principal spoke about kindness and courage. Then he shared a story about a student who had shown those qualities. Mila listened without realizing the story was about her. When the principal called her name, she froze for a moment. Sarah, who had been invited to the assembly, smiled and nodded encouragingly. Mila walked to the front with shaking hands. The principal spoke about the plane and about helping without fear. The hall was quiet as students listened. Mila felt heat rise in her face, but she stood still. When the principal finished, the room filled with soft applause. Mila bowed her head slightly and returned to her seat. She felt overwhelmed but proud. That evening, Mila told Mr. Ron about the assembly through a short message. She thanked him again for believing in her. Mr. Ron read the message while sitting in his office late at night. He smiled and leaned back in his chair. He thought about how far Mila had come without ever asking for attention. He felt certain that her story should inspire more people. Mr. Ron decided to create something meaningful. He worked with educators and helpers to start a small program focused on teaching children empathy and courage. He named it after a simple word that Mila often used. He did not use his own name. He wanted the focus to stay on values, not fame. Before launching the program, Mr. Ron asked Sarah and Mila for permission to share a part of their story. He promised to protect Mila's privacy and dignity. Sarah discussed it carefully with Mila. Mila thought for a long time and then agreed. She said stories help people feel less alone. She said if her story helped someone, then it was worth sharing. The program slowly gained attention. Schools began adopting its ideas. Children were encouraged to notice others and speak up kindly. Teachers shared examples of small, brave actions. Mila's name was not shared widely, but her influence was everywhere. Mr. Ron felt fulfilled in a way he never had before. Months passed and seasons changed. Mila continued growing and learning. She still faced moments of sadness and doubt. Some nights she missed her parents deeply. On those nights she would sit quietly and remember her mother's voice. She would remind herself that kindness was something no one could take away. One weekend, Mr. Ron visited the apartment again with Sarah present. He brought books and school supplies but nothing excessive. They sat together and talked about life. Mr. Ron asked Mila what she had learned since the plane. Mila said she learned that fear does not disappear but courage can grow around it. Mr. Ron nodded and said he learned the same. Mr. Ron shared that he was changing how he lived. He said he spent more time listening and less time rushing. He said success meant little if it did not help others feel seen. Mila listened and smiled. She said adults sometimes forget simple truths. Mr. Ron laughed softly and agreed. As years moved forward, Mila grew taller and stronger. She continued to carry kindness into every space she entered. She chose to study subjects that focused on helping people. Sarah watched her with pride and quiet joy. Their life was still modest but full of warmth. Mr. Ron stayed in Mila's life as a guide, not a ruler. He supported her education and encouraged her choices. He never pushed her toward a path she did not choose. He believed her strength came from freedom and respect. One day Mila was invited to speak at a small school event. She stood on the stage with steady hands. She spoke about noticing others and acting with care. She did not mention wealth or power. She spoke about choice and courage. The room listened quietly, just like the plane had once gone silent. After the event, a child approached Mila and said her words helped. Mila smiled and knelt to listen. She realized then that the question she asked on the plane had grown into something much bigger. It had become a chain of kindness moving forward. That evening Mila looked out at the sky filled with stars. She thought about the frightened girl she once was and the moment she chose to stand up. She understood now that bravery does not need permission. It only needs heart. Far away, Mr. Ron stood by his window doing the same. He felt grateful for a life changed by a child who asked an honest question. He knew that true wealth was found in moments that connect people. Their paths had crossed for only a short time on a plane, but the impact lasted forever. A poor 10-year-old girl had saved more than a life that day. She had awakened a world.